On today's show, we're going to look at three Cavaliers: Isaac Okoro, Caris LeVert, Dean Wade. How can they get better for next season and have a bigger impact on the Cavs? Let's dive in.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, that music you heard on the way in is from our friends at Astro Radio. I am Chris Manning. That is Evan Dammarell, Locked On Cavs podcast, your daily look at the Cleveland Cavaliers. Right now, still 3 days a week, but we'll be back at 5 days soon as the season gets closer. Thanks again to Jake Stevens, as always, for his work on production. And by the way, if you haven't already, Browns season starts on Sunday, Locked On Browns. If you want some Browns podcasting in your life, want to tell you, too, that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, and that's guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started. All right, segment 1 today, Isaac Okoro. Segment 2, Caris LeVert. Segment 3, Dean Wade. 3 players, all not at the top of the Cavs roster, all who I think can and could provide things next year, but I think there are questions about what they look like to different degrees. Evan, let's start with Okoro. He is perhaps maybe on the outside looking in the rotation to some degree right now. But if you're going to say this is how he can improve, this is how he could matter next season, what does that look like in your mind?
Well, first and foremost, thank you to you and Danny Cunningham and Dave Vermeil for holding down the fort while I was away. But in terms of Isaac Okoro, just kind of being like a impact player for the Cavs and just carving out a spot in the rotation, we talked about this at length. Like the new additions are more or less, maybe Ty Jerome is like the fringe guy, but like in terms of Niang and Strus, like those are 2 guys that are gonna get into the rotation, and JB Bickerstaff is not a dude who plays deep into his bench. But for Okoro to get minutes, like you're on 2 paths. Is it tighten the handle or is it improve your 3-point shot? And I'm firmly in the camp of, for what the Cavs need in terms of just what Isaac Okoro can be as a player, it's finding just a reliable enough 3-point shot that it keeps defenses honest, because he will always be Cleveland's best point of attack defender. But like that only gets you so far. That's only 50% of what basketball requires. And if you're able to keep defenses honest, stretch out the floor, and maybe take advantage of the opportunities that you're wide open, if you're Isaac Okoro, like that is the biggest thing to get minutes in this rotation, just going forward, if you're either him or the Cavs coaching staff.
I think it's a volume question, because I think if you look at like the numbers, like his accuracy, they're still below average numbers, particularly non-corner threes last year, 24%, but those took up like a very small percentage of his shots. Most of his shots came in the corner. He was at 37% from the corner, so below average for the wing, at a really high volume. 39% of his shots came in corner threes. That was in the 99th percentile of wings. He had, like, for his position, a good effective field goal percentage. He's had 3 straight years of good numbers at the rim, even though he doesn't get there as much as you might like. So my instinct, I should say, was volume. But if he's taking that many corner threes, and like I don't think there's a world where he is necessarily taking more non-corner threes, it's just not where he's situated, and maybe that's a problem in itself. I think it's just, can he just get up to average on corner threes? That's one of the most efficient, valuable analytic shots on the floor. That's the shot he's going to take, and if teams are respecting him, that opens up some other things. I think it's that simple, because I think if you look at the defensive side of it and you make the case of how can he get in their rotation independent of this, it's that even if they bring in Strus, even if they brought in Niang, there's not anyone I think they're going to play who can do what he does defensively, and there are going to be minutes where I could see them wanting that skill set on the floor, even with these offensive concerns that we know are there.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the nature of the beast when it comes to Isaac Okoro. Like coming out of college and just with his weird development path, like it's clear the 3-point shot hasn't manifested as quickly as many of us would have liked. But as you said, like he does get a lot of looks in the corner. I think for the Cavs, like the one play they maybe have in their back pocket for Isaac is, okay, Isaac, you're in the corner. drive to the basket, either draw a foul and get to the line, or just get an easy bucket or easy attempt at the rim, because he does have some pretty good percentages in terms of scoring at the basket, or at least in close proximity to the basket. And just being able to stretch out the floor just makes life easier for him. I think it makes life easier for the Cavs as well, especially with a team that likes to play two bigs in their starting lineup. And this isn't just me saying like Isaac Okoro is going to be the starting three for the Cavs. Again, you and I are in agreement that it's likely going to be Max Strus, at least in pencil, heading into training camp, and we'll see how that battle evolves. But for Okoro, it's interesting, and just on the inverse side of things, like, think of it this way: like, there was that time during Las Vegas Summer League, and at least for the brief moment leading up to the season, that like point Okoro was a thing that was considered, and just like he could handle the rock a little bit. Maybe he has some of those Iguodala vibes, or he's comfortable running an offense, or at least being like a primary ball handler and playmaker. Like, do you think that's a path for him as well? Like, if the Cavs are like, you know what, Isaac, the handle's there if you tighten it up a little bit more. It may not be obviously Iguodala level, or at least elite playmaker level, but you're rudimentary enough that you can flow within the offense. We can compromise our offensive flow because of the lack of spacing, but you're able to provide passing and playmaking. Like, do you think that's another viable path for him, or is it just at this juncture, and just with how the Cavs are constructed with him on the roster, it's you need to become much more reliable from 3-point range?
I don't think that's a feasible option. His usage rate has dropped every year of his career. It hasn't happened yet, and now you have Darius Garland, you have Donovan Mitchell, you have Caris LeVert, three guys who are going to put the ball in their hands well before you're going to put it in his hands. And you have Evan Mobley, who is at some point going to showcase, I think, in a growth in his offensive game, let's say, and more responsibility. I think if you wanted to frame that as a connecting kind of thing, where Okoro was screening, Okoro was cutting, Okoro is moving around in that way, I think that is the path. I think in terms of like the names you'd want to use, I think like I would aim much lower than Iguodala vibes. I would aim at like, because the step from where he is at now to anything close to that is massive. Where he is at now is they need to feel comfortable, because they don't call plays for him. This is not someone that ever is going to have, they're not going to have a set that's a play for Isaac. What he has to be able to read and react, and there has to maybe be built-in cuts for him to fill back into space. I think for them, if you saw that they trusted him more, you would see him actually fill back from the corner up to the wing in a way that he does not now. Most of the time, he just stands there and doesn't move. Mm-hmm. He has, like, I remember talking to someone in the league last year who pulled some second spectrum data, but this is before Kevin Love, the whole thing happened there. The two players in the Cavs who moved less on offense, who like covered the least amount of ground, were Isaac Okoro and Kevin Love.
The latter makes sense just because of age and maybe like health with his time in the Cavs, but the former definitely surprises me because he is effective, like fast break and streaking scenarios.
I am really curious to see just if he plays in a significant way, or if he is in the rotation. I think he could be like the ninth guy and play like 15 to 20 minutes a game. Again, I wouldn't be surprised. I think particularly if this Rubio thing doesn't resolve. But like we'll see. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows yet. And if there's someone who like we haven't seen, this is what he does. He's quiet, whatever. I don't like what does he come? Does he look any different in the fall? Is like a real question, and there's contracts up for him as well. This is just a really big year for whatever Okoro was going to be in Cleveland, and I think in the NBA, this is a pretty important year for him when you think about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, if it's not him finishing out the remainder of his rookie scale contract with the Cavs, it's with another team. We'll obviously see if the Cavs use him as a trade asset or not, but let's just assume he stays with the Cavs. Like, he needs to be an impact player in some way to at least convince the Cavs front office to sign him to some form of an extension, at least in terms of what he's worth. Maybe the Cavs like do a shorter term deal to say they believe in his potential, but there's an easier out for both sides if it doesn't work out, or if it does work out in Okoro's favor. But like, I don't want to say morbidly curious because there's like other bigger pieces in play for this Cavs team, but like what Isaac Okoro is as a player heading into year 4 after kind of a disappointing year 3 on offense, at least. Like, I'm just curious to see what we get from him as a player, because I don't want to say the tape's completely figured out on him because there's still potential there, but like there's not a lot of room for growth and improvement on this Cavs team that really gives me a clear idea of what he can be as a player.
All right, coming up next, Caris LeVert, who I think we know what he is, but what does it look like this year? What does it look like year 2 of him in this malleable kind of role? Is that something he can continue to be? We'll talk about that coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, official sportsbook of Locked On, and you can get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet that same $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Think about that. $100 off NFL Sunday ticket. If you're an NFL junkie, if you live out of market, $100 off is a pretty great deal. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use. You can bet on anything from spreads to player props and more. They have NBA futures in there as well if you're a Cavs fan jonesing for some of that action. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Coming back in, Caris LeVert. Evan, here's where I start with him.
Okay.
I don't think he is going to add anything new that we haven't already seen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, he is 29. I think we know exactly kind of what he is. And then where I go to is this is not so much an improvement thing as is the 3-point shooting you had last year for real? Like, or is that a 1-year blip? 38% overall, 38% on corner threes, 41% on corner threes. Those are by and large, particularly in all threes and non-corner threes, the best numbers of his career were tied for them. So if those are real, I feel pretty good about his fit compared to if those numbers fall off in a drastic way.
I agree. I think the 3-point shooting thing is interesting, and you are the one who put this bug in my ear, or at least in the back of my brain, that he as in Caris LeVert, abandoned his mid-range shot quite a bit and became much more 3-point reliant, and at least became a creature of Cleveland's offensive flow because he isn't the number 1, 2, 3, or even 4th option sometimes, depending on who's out there on the floor. But I'm curious about that, and also how he just kind of stepped up in those little ways that it can be tracked with stats and advanced analytics, but also just like can only really be like appreciated or understood by giving the old eye test to him, because he's a guy who stepped up in a lot of ways for the Cavs in terms of just becoming like a consistent bench option for them. Just whether it's passing or playmaking or scoring, which is the biggest feature with Caris LeVert, or even just him stepping up on defense. And sure, he's not like the guy maybe many thought he would be during his time with the Nets and when he was kind of at his peak health wise, but there's still some ghost in the machine that is able to show that like he's able to tap into his God-given abilities in terms of wingspan and just length and athleticism to be a bit of a passable player defensively. And like, is that sustainable? Is this a guy that is going to continue to do that? Or is this a guy who's like, oh crud, I'm in the midst of a contract year, I have to really step it up to make sure I can get top dollar? Because that's it, because when you look at his contract, you're like, okay, this isn't clearly like top dollar. Who knows what the market could have had for him, but like this is a pretty like team friendly deal that Caris LeVert agreed to with the Cavs. But I'm interested to see like what kind of player do the Cavs get? Like, do they still have like a super 6-man to round out that guard rotation, kind of be a guy who can be a 1, a 2, or a 3 given the offensive play call or the set or the rotation or really anything in between? Like, there's a lot of stuff at play. Like Caris LeVert, in terms of just like the two guys we discussed so far, like I'm fascinated to see how he fits in, because Cleveland made a lot of moves this offseason to like accentuate what Caris LeVert does in terms of just bench personnel and role players. And they're clearly obviously not building this team solely around Caris LeVert, but like they are certainly making Caris LeVert's life a lot easier. So maybe we don't see like that reliance on the 3-point shot. Maybe we see him regress organically, because like that's just not who he is as a player, but also because he has the luxury of maybe leaning more so on what he perceives as his strengths and maybe what he's just more comfortable in doing as a player.
the strengths part of it, I think, is an interesting question, because last year you saw two things happen to him that were, I think, really... They are so out of line with most of the rest of his career statistically that I don't know really what to attribute them to. So he took 29% of his shots in the mid-range. I think that was his lowest since his rookie season, back when he was 22 and 16-17 in Brooklyn. I think some of that you can just attribute to Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell take more of their shots there, and you have two bigs. I think some of that is just baked into that. At the same time, his efficiency on mid-range shots, which for 3 years and two full seasons, and break it down that way, was above average for his position, pretty good for wings and combo guards. It dropped back down to a level that was lower than even some of his kind of middling late Brooklyn season before he ends up in Indiana. So, does more spacing give him more comfort there, and then maybe he's attacking more, and then maybe he's racking up more assists? I think there's a world, Evan, where the Cavs, instead of shoehorning in another guard or forcing Ty Jerome into the rotation or something, say, okay, let's just play one of Okoro or Wade, who we'll talk about next, and maybe that's our 9th guy or 8th guy, depending. You'll play a backup center as well, but we can skew a little bit smaller, and Caris can kind of, even if we know he's not great at this, and you need to build a lot of support, I think, for him to do this, if there's a version of him you can unleash that can benefit from the spacing almost as, in a way. I think that's a good inclination apart, just because I think if he goes back into some of that stuff, and you kind of, maybe that kind of hedges against the variance of his 3-point shot falling off, I just don't. He is just such a imperfect, weird fit that I could also talk myself into doing some positive things on this roster.
He's very mercurial. Just looking at this currently, how this Cavs roster is constructed, but
I mean, he's not a archetype a lot of teams even have. He's just a weird. There's not many guys who play like him anymore.
He's a dude who would thrive in the early 2000s that is trying to adapt his game to a modern level of basketball, in my opinion, at least. Tons of shot attempts, a lot of mid-range shots, maybe more shots at the basket. You're comfortable with him kind of putting up some maybe garbage efficiency numbers, but he's going to get you a bucket more often than not. And I am curious as well, how the Cavs utilize him, how he performs this year. Does JB Bickerstaff give him the leash and empower him to kind of just play to himself, figure out what does and doesn't work? Because assuming going just opening night, Strus and Niang will be in the rotation, and then you have the starting 5 with Strus in that group, and then you have LeVert, Niang, let's just say Isaac Okoro for now, but if Ricky Rubio is back, maybe him. If not Rubio, maybe Ty Jerome if Jerome just pops in camp or something like that. But that's just smaller minutes at the end of the rotation. But either way, and then Dean Wade, who we'll talk about in a bit. But do you have enough shooting? Do you run creative enough lineups where you do those 2 guard lineups with Okoro LeVert and Mitchell? Then you surround it with Strus, Niang. And then let's say Evan Mobley shot conveys, or maybe you try to play Dean Wade at the 5. If you really try to go small with this, do you surround Caris LeVert with enough shooting where you're okay, Caris, maybe last year was a bit of a fluke in terms of your 3-point shot. Let's give you the spacing to operate because you're much more comfortable attacking the basket or attacking the mid range. And if you have shooters around him, that's a way to make it work. And there's a lot of just kind of fun ways the Cavs can empower him a little bit to make him a little bit more comfortable, and maybe just let him play Caris LeVert style of basketball, because I don't want to call him a vital piece, but he's one of their more important role players heading into next season, because on a night-to-night basis, he's always going to be getting minutes, and you want to make sure he's on more often than not, and you have to find creative ways to empower him to do that.
All right, coming up next, Dean Wade, who... Is he being usurped by George Niang? Is there still role for him? We'll talk about that and what he could do to make a case for himself coming up next. Evan, where do you start with Dean Wade coming off last season where he did play 20 minutes a game when healthy but was injured a lot? Where do you start with him, and as far as how can he get better and find a spot in the rotation?
I think of that famous LeBron quote where he goes, and then somebody had to transcribe the fart noise, because it's just a lot of unfortunate happenstance for Dean Wade. Like, they jettisoned Kevin Love to the back, just completely out of the rotation to give Dean Wade minutes. He was maybe perceived as a starting 3 for this Cavs team because they like to play bigger, just because of what they had with Lauri Markkanen last year. And they explored a lot of options with him, but it's just a lot of unfortunate time with the injury and maybe just the lack of confidence in his shot, or at least a reliability in his shot. And you're hoping heading into camp and heading into this season that the shot is still there, that the confidence is still there, and you maybe build it piece by piece, little by little. And like, you look at Dean Wade, you mentioned Georges Niang heading into the break, like at least heading into camp, like I feel much more comfortable with Georges Niang being the guy that like gets minutes over Dean Wade, just because like Niang is just unafraid to shoot 3-pointers, at least based on his time with Philly and maybe with Utah as well. But like, maybe just that confidence that Niang has more upside on the hesitancy Wade had sometimes when you watch him play with some of the start, whether it's in the starting lineup or certain bench units. Like, he would pass up wide open threes to like maybe make the right play, in his eyes, make the right play and make the right pass, when you just need him to rip it, because he is a floor spacing big who can give you some of that rebounding, maybe some of the more defensive upside that Kevin Love didn't give you. But like, through the lens of just like what Dean Wade was, like, you want to bring him along slowly, help him rebuild his confidence in his shot. I'm sure he's doing that on his own right now, but like, there are clearly guys that are ahead of Wade now that the Cavs have brought in outside of the organization that Wade is definitely going to be jockeying with for minutes come regular season time for the Cavs.
Yeah, I don't know if you can play him in Niang, like if there's a ton of room for both of them. Like, I think Wade can play the 3, which gives him some advantages. I think that is maybe particularly helpful. But I think you have to,
with Niang playing the 3, like, it's sicko stuff, and you're putting Mobley at the 4 and Allen at the 5 to like completely cover him.
Niang is not playing the 3. I think Wade can play. I don't think Niang has a shot at playing the 3. I think we've seen at least Dean Wade defend and play the 3 nominally, not in a way that is like, he's kind of wingy to me more than he is a big. Like, that's how I kind of perceive him, as this kind of big tweener wing. But you look at, then you just, I think like some of the injury stuff with him has maybe kept me at least from completing, having a full scope of him. Like, my mind when I pose this, what?
Do you think it's an injury, or do you think it's confidence? Because I think it's confidence.
I think it's both, because I think that there's a rhythm question. I think when you have the shoulder injury, you probably feel off, and you never looked right after that. And I think he's just had a lot of injuries. Like, he played 58 games in 2021, 49 the next year, and then last year played 42. He's never had like a full consistent NBA season at this point, and all of his seasons have had like some wonkiness. Like, there's wonkiness in his stats like every year. Like, there's the weird year where he just couldn't make corner threes, and that didn't make any sense. I look at his rebounding numbers, which was kind of my first instinct with this, and like, in my head, I don't think Dean Wade is like a particularly effective rebounder. I think one of the things we learned with Cleveland once Kevin Love left is that Kevin Love was like a pretty important rebounder for this team.
Watch him in Miami.
Yeah, like, watch what he did. And then I'm like, okay, there's no way Dean Wade has like a particularly good like defensive rebounding rate on field goals, and yet he's like above average for forwards. And he's been above average for forwards in 2 of his 3 years, and then the year in between he like dipped way below. So there's just like this, and like some of that is that Lauri Markkanen influenced. I still feel like Dean Wade is in this class of player to me where I think he can make stuff happen, and yet I don't totally understand what his like defining best uses are, because he's not a plus shooter. He's like kind of an average shooter. He's okay at attacking off the dribble, but he's not great at it. I think he's seemingly an okay rebounder, but he's not boosting your defensive rebounding rate in a meaningful way, and how you control the glass in that way. He's not a defensive stopper at an apex level. I think Dean Wade kind of just needs to find a niche of like what he actually is. Like, Niang has like a clear rebounding deficiency, but that dude's gonna let it fly. Like, you understand what he does. I don't think I know exactly what Dean Wade's like best skill is right now.
Yeah, and that's an interesting parable when it comes to Dean Wade, because what is he as a player? Like, in terms of just like on paper or based on what the Cavs did last year. Like, it was the replacement for Kevin Love in terms of just like a 3-point shooting big who, to your point, like doesn't give you that rebounding upside because Kevin Love's a Hall of Fame caliber rebounder, but like Wade's able to give you something, and the trade-off is like some more defensive chops compared to Love. But it's still like a figuring out process of who and what he is with this current iteration of the Cavs. And again, like, this is a role player. Like, you're not going to break and bend over every single resource in order to make sure Dean Wade is like fully comfortable, but like it's going to be a solving and a figuring out process. And I'm going to at least circle back to like the Isaac Okoro thing. Like, I don't know how much the Cavs are going to devote time, energy, resources to make sure Dean Wade is like functional as a player, or do they want to just make sure he's functional enough that he's just more of a trade asset for them to make more of the quote unquote big boy moves to push this team from, hey, we got punked by the Knicks in the first round, to we're going to make some legitimate noise and maybe make the Eastern Conference Finals to the NBA Finals? Because like getting Max Strus, one of the best 3-point shooters for a team that lost in the finals not too long ago, and George Niang, like clearly the term one of the best 3-point shooting bigs on the market in terms of what the Cavs could work with financially, like there's a clear vision. And if Dean Wade can't fit into that, like it's use the bathroom or get off the pot at this point. Like, the Cavs are kind of probably weighing their options and like, hey, Wade's a successful development story in terms of a UDFA, but you're not going to be waiting around forever for him to figure it out. And that's the interesting parable, because this Cavs team became good a little bit suddenly. Again, same thing can go with Okoro too, but like they don't have the luxury of letting Wade kind of figure out who he is or what he can be, because 1, they're already good. 2, they got Donovan Mitchell. 3, now there's like heightened expectations. Like, you can't give Dean Wade a lot of that leeway to figure out what he can and can't be.
Yeah, and he's at an age where I also just wonder if they're like, we kind of like, we're like, you might just know. Like, I'm not saying he can't get better. I'm not saying there can't be a change, but this might just, there's like a baseline, I think, at least somewhat to work with here with all of these guys. But I think, like, if I had to guess, if I were to bet on like one of these guys, like showing you something kind of maybe new-ish, I think it's Okoro just based on the age, and yet I wouldn't bet on that either. Like, there's a 0% chance I would feel confident that that's happening. I think all these guys like might just be what they are, and I think if they can, it's like margins, and like then maybe one of them are combined in a trade for someone that is better.
At least with Okoro, he has like that athletic upside compared to Wade, and like the 3-point defense, and just like,
I mean, straight up, that guy defends whips. He whips on defense. It's just like there's just this whole other side of the ball that he's like good.
Oh yeah, like
kind of.
Yeah, he's less than suboptimal in terms of just offensive upside. Like, it's just weird because you and I both were talking about, like, probably this time last year, like, okay, Okoro needs a leap in X, Y, and Z in order to be like a high impact player. Maybe these are our expectations heading into year 3, and you saw glimmers of it, but it didn't fully manifest, and you can make excuses for it. But if Isaac Okoro isn't like a viable player for you, like, it's an easier decision for the Cavs and their coaching staff, because Cleveland's front office made the moves to upgrade the back ends of their rotation and also just the rotation period by adding Strus, Niang, Jerome. Even Damian Jones is like an upgrade over like at least Robin Lopez and Ed Davis. Like, the Cavs went out and got moves to improve their rotation, so they're not like totally compromised come playoff time, where they only have 4, maybe 5 or 6 players max that are viable in a playoff rotation. And that gives you at least the luxury to expand and just kind of work the things. And it's an untenable task, and something I'm always just curious about, because like JB Bickerstaff was kind of hired to like grow in with this team and kind of figure out his chops as a coach, despite like his past experiences, and like help this team grow and develop. But like, they became good so fast that a lot of these players kind of fell to the, I don't want to say fell to the wayside, but like there's a shift in priority, especially now that there's not going to be like a focus to like make sure Isaac Okoro's shots manifesting, and of course he has coaches working with him on that, but like it's not like the highest priority for the Cavs. Clearly, like right now it's winning, and winning as much as you can, and winning as much as you can in the postseason. And it's pretty clear like the front office is like, hey, we have some pretty solid dudes that are in-house, but might as well just add some more viable guys just in case those guys don't click based on what we're cooking with right now.
Yeah, the Cavs scaled up. It's not on the Cavs necessarily to have to bring them along fully. They kind of have to prove that they're worth bringing along is where I think. But let's end there. I'm Chris Manning. That's been Evan Dammarell as well. Thanks again to Jake Stevens for producing Back at Ya after the weekend. Enjoy the time away, everyone. And we'll talk to you next week.